Hi there, Exiles. So, 324 is coming, and everyone's looking at the new and changed gems, theory crafting, trying to decide on their league starters. And inevitably, discussion on the topic of damage effectiveness and comparing it between skills comes up. I see a lot of confusion about this, like people saying certain skills scale better with added damage than others, which doesn't really happen. So I thought I'd make a video explaining what damage effectiveness is, why it exists, how to interpret it, and a common method used to normalize skills into damage effectiveness per second, which is helpful in defining how good a skill is. First off, what is damage effectiveness? The simplest answer is that damage effectiveness is a number, a percentage, and every skill that hits has one. Flat added damage from any source is applied to the skill at that percentage. So if you have a skill with 200% damage effectiveness and you get 10 flat added damage, the skill will gain 20 flat base damage. Okay, so then the higher a skill's damage effectiveness, the better it is, right? Wrong. If only it was that simple. Damage effectiveness exists to prevent some skills from being stronger than others with flat added damage. For example, skills that inherently hit very fast or have mechanics that give a big multiplier through stages or stacks or whatever. For example, if we're in a world where damage effectiveness doesn't exist and we have a skill number 1, with a base cast speed of 2 casts per second and a base damage of 50, that works out to 100 DPS. We have skill number 2 with base cast speed of half a cast per second and 200 base damage, also works out to 100 DPS, right? So let's say we give both of these skills 100 flat added damage. Skill number 1, base damage becomes 50 plus 100 equals 150 at a cast rate of 2 equals 300 DPS, right? Skill number 2 has a base damage of 200 plus 100 equals 300 times the cast speed of 0.5 per second equals 150 DPS. So suddenly, you have skill number 1 whose DPS is tripled with this amount of flat added damage, and skill number 2 whose DPS is only 50% more with this much added damage. That's why damage effectiveness exists. So how do we tell if a skill has good damage or not? Damage effectiveness is certainly one part of the equation, but as we saw in this example, the other big part is speed. Cast time for spells and attack speed multiplier for attacks. There's also base damage, but that's mostly ignorable for the purposes of this video, because for spells, base damage is proportional to damage effectiveness. And for attacks, they have a separate base damage multiplier, but it's the same as damage effectiveness, because the base damage comes from your weapon's damage. Now, on to normalizing skills damage. This is a combination of a skill's damage effectiveness and its attack or cast speed to produce a number which is the average damage effectiveness per second. This is a good baseline to compare skills, but it's almost never the whole picture. You have to look at a skill's specific mechanics on top of that number to be able to come to a conclusion on how good that skill is. Let's go over some examples. First example, Heavy Strike. Pretty simple skill, you smack an enemy. So let's see, it has an attack speed multiplier of 85% and a damage effectiveness of 313. Any other skill mechanics? It does. It has a chance to deal double damage. At level 20 with 20 quality, that's 59%. Alright, so let's do the math. 0.85 times 313 times 1.59. Oh, and if you didn't know, X% chance to deal double damage, when you average it out, is equivalent to X% more damage. That's where this is coming from. So Heavy Strike has a damage effectiveness of 423 per second. That's not a bad number. It's kind of middling, so in cases like this, I usually look at the other skill mechanics. Heavy Strike is a strike skill, and you have to stand still to hit the enemy. But, you see, it knocks enemies back on hit. So while you're attacking an enemy, you're going to knock it away out of your range, and you're going to have to reposition all the time, and it's just going to be really annoying. So with just a middling damage effectiveness per second and not much else going for it, Heavy Strike is not a great skill. Next example is Splitting Steel. This skill is pretty meta in 323 due to being buffed. It lost a damage penalty, and it also lost its interaction with steel shards, which made it significantly smoother to play. It has a 90% attack speed multiplier and a damage effectiveness of 210. It also has this mechanic where the main projectile can split into others. These split projectiles can return and can overlap. So let's do the math. 0.9 times 210 is 189, and this gets multiplied by the number of splits. It has 5 by default at level 20, and you would also usually use it with Sniper's Mark, which was another 4, so let's multiply it by 9. And let's apply the damage penalty that comes with returning projectile support, which is 0.39 if I remember correctly. So we have a pretty conservative estimate of 663 damage effectiveness per second. That's pretty good considering you can get more projectiles, and in the endgame you can get a Nimbus and remove this damage penalty. As we can see, without it, it's 1700 damage effectiveness, which is just ridiculous. So yeah, Splitting Steel is a good skill. Next example is Reap. It has a cast time of 0.8 seconds, but we want to invert that to get the cast speed, which is 1.25. The damage effectiveness of 210. And it also has this blood charge mechanic for single target. When you hit an enemy and none of them die, you gain a blood charge, and you deal 20% more damage with 20 quality per blood charge. A maximum of 5 blood charges means that's 100% more damage, or double. That gives us 525, which is already pretty good, but you can use Awakened Spell Cascade support, and without any AoE scaling, you get 3 intrinsic overlaps. So let's multiply that by 3, and let's also take into account the damage penalty of Spell Cascade, which is 28% less, so 0.72, and we get 1130 effectiveness per second. That's a pretty high number, and Reap is a good skill. It's also a Fizz spell, so you can take advantage of Spell Impale or Fizz Conversion. Next example is Penance Brand of Dissipation. This skill is getting a big nerf in 324, and you're about to see why. So this is using pre-nerf numbers, right? As a base cast time of 0.75 per second, but since it's a brand, that's not the number we're looking at. That's only the time it takes to throw out a brand. Once a brand attaches, it activates with a different frequency, and it's down here. It activates every 0.6 seconds while attached. So we're going to use that, 0.6 inverted, 1.66 per second, times the damage effectiveness of 65, and the skill also has this energy mechanic. Every activation, it gains in energy, and it has a damage multiplier of 60% more damage with hits per energy after the first. The maximum energy is, well, it actually doesn't say on the skill here, but it's the same as normal Penance Brand, which is 20 max energy, right? 20 max energy, 60% more damage per energy after the first. 19 times 60 is 1140% more, so that's multiply by 12.4. And we get the Penance Brand of Dissipation, once fully ramped at 20 energy, has 1343 damage effectiveness per second, which is ridiculous. Okay, so let's see how the nerf impacted it. Down here, now activates every 0.75 seconds while attached, so that's the new cast, that's the new speed. Has 50 effectiveness times 0.5, and now deals 30% more damage with hits and ailments per energy after the first. 30 times 19 is 570, so we're multiplying this by 6.7. Now Penance Brand of Dissipation in 324 will have a damage effectiveness of 446, which is much lower, deservedly. It'll still probably be a pretty decent skill. This is not a bad damage effectiveness number, and it's a brand skill, so you can attach it to an enemy and just run around while it deals damage. So I think it'll still be pretty good, just not as ridiculous as it was. Last example is one of the new Transfigure gems coming in 324, Tornado of Elemental Turbulence. So let's see. It has a cast time of 0.75 seconds, but again, we're going to ignore this number because it has a line that says deals damage every 0.25 seconds, or 4 times per second. And this is a hard limit. You can't scale this with cast speed or anything. The only thing cast speed is going to do is make throwing out tornadoes feel a little better. This has pros and cons. Sure, you can't scale cast speed, but that means the investment you would normally put into cast speed can be put into other areas of damage. So let's do the calculation. 4 hits per second times a damage effectiveness of 0.65, and you can have a maximum of 3 tornadoes, so multiply that by 3, and we get a damage effectiveness of 780. That's a pretty high number, and I'm not the only one to have noticed this. There's quite a bit of discussion on people planning to league start this skill. So that's it for the video. I hope this helped you get a better understanding of damage effectiveness and how to analyze the power of skills. Have a good league start, everyone.